Welcome. Hello. Welcome to the Cambridge Youth Strike for Climate of the 2020 September. You're watching our meeting with Cambridge councillors to discuss actions they are taking and need to take around the theme of Build Back Better. So, my name is Junaid. My name is Junaid. I'm the co-chair of the Cambridge Schools Eco Council, and I will be chairing this meeting. And if you haven't heard of the Cambridge Schools Eco Council, they are an organisation, a group of school children who plan and organise the Youth Strikes for Climate in Cambridge, and go and do more on top of that. They also take part in community events. They speak with individual businesses, local businesses, and politicians like we are doing now. And it's all about taking the stuff that we do on the street and turning that into practical action to save our planet. So we have an agenda which I'm just gonna post into the Zoom chat and on the YouTube live chat, so you can keep track of what's going on. And we have a fantastic panel of youth strikers and Cambridge councillors, and all of who will take part in this conversation. There will be time at the end for an open discussion where anyone can make a point or a question. If you're on YouTube, you can type in the live chat, and if you are on Zoom, there is a function to raise your hand. So if you go to participants, and on the bottom right, you'll see raise hand. Right, I'm going to allow the youth strikers to introduce themselves now. So first we've got 5 youth strikers. First of which is Arthur.
Hi, I'm Arthur. I'm 13 years old. I go to the Perth school, and I care about the climate crisis because it's seriously endangering like tens of millions of people and billions of animals. And I just don't want to see our world get destroyed.
And we've got Ginny.
Hi, I'm Ginny. I'm 14. I go to St. Bede's Interchurch School in Cambridge, and I became involved with the Eco Council after seeing natural disasters firsthand and the effects that they have on the people of the world, and hoping that we can try and prevent these from getting any worse in the future.
We have Magnus.
I'm Magnus, I'm 13, I go to Netherhall School in 6th form. I'm passionate about the climate because it's a problem that's killing thousands and endangering more.
And Luana.
I'm Luana, I'm 16, I go to Long Road Sixth Form College, and I care about the climate because I've seen firsthand and experienced firsthand what extreme weather can do to people in homes and in places that aren't well upkept.
And we have councillors. So first of all, we have Jocelyn Scott.
Right, yes. I'm Jocelyn Scott, a county councillor from Cambridgeshire. I represent Arbury in the county council. And I'm concerned about climate change from a number of perspectives. I've lived in the Pacific, and in the Pacific there are people whose nation states are islands, and those islands are disappearing under the ocean, and they're disappearing under the ocean because of what we in the so-called first world are doing or not doing in terms of climate change. And another reason, I'll just conclude with 2 reasons. Another reason is because when I look at the fires that are burning in California and the fires that burnt in Australia recently, what I know is that the fire also hurts the earth. It's not as if the earth has no feelings. It doesn't have feelings in terms of the same nervous system that we have, but it certainly has feelings, and so do the trees. And when the fire has stopped above the soil, down below the earth, the fire is still burning, and it's burning the earth and it's burning the roots of the trees. And I think we need to actually see what the consequences are of what we do or don't do and what we don't see. Thanks.
And we have Josh Matthews.
Thanks, Junaid. So I'm Josh Matthews. I'm a city councillor for Newnham in Cambridge. So I have a sort of slight engineering and sustainability background, which kind of first piqued my interest in these sort of topics a few years back. Elected to the city council just about a year ago. In May, I became the Lib Dem spokesperson for climate change and the environment. As the main thing happening on the city council front right now is we're in the process of drafting our climate change strategy for 2021 to 2026. So that's going to go out for consultation with the public in the very near future. I think one thing to maybe add on, and one sort of note of optimism for Cambridge, is that we do have a fantastic platform. I think Cambridge is somewhere the rest of the world can potentially look towards, and as a city and a county council, we have the expertise right on our doorstep. I know we do some work on that front that I think Ian's going to touch on a little bit, but yeah, we really hold the keys, and it's not just what we do in the city, it's very much the example we can set. Thanks.
We have Ian Manning.
Thanks very much, everyone, and thanks for having me here. My name's Ian Manning, so I'm on the County Council, and I'm the Liberal Democrat spokes on highways, which is obviously highly relevant to climate change if we think about the use of the private car. Our group took the motion to the County Council that saw all the groups unanimously declaring climate emergency, which I'm very proud of. Closer to where the area I represent, which is Chesterton, which is in the north of the city, we're about to get up to 8,000 homes being built on a new city district in the northeast Cambridge area action plan, and it's the move of the sewage works is allowing that. So I'm working extremely hard with lots of colleagues to try and make that as sustainable as possible, and just specifically on that, we're putting forward the idea of having a fast train service between what is currently Cambridge North Station and will eventually be created Cambridge South Station, as one other way of making sure that people don't have to rely on the private car to get around the city. They can get on a train, get off very easy, a far greener form of transport. As Josh said, I also have a special role on the County Council as a member champion for evidence-informed policy, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in relation to the climate change strategy.
Thank you. And we have Dave Agent.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you for inviting me. I care about climate change because I care about people and I care about our society. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, although I'm finding that somewhat difficult to maintain in line with my position as a councillor because of some of the actions that Extinction Rebellion take. But I am still very much a member of Extinction Rebellion, and I think that their motive is fine. It's just sometimes some of their actions are a bit incompatible with what I'm able to do and continue to be a councillor. But I think it's time our society woke up and tasted the coffee. I'm one of those people that are responsible for ruining the world and spoiling the world. And I'd like to see us turn that back. And I'd like to see it do it a lot faster than we're currently doing it. I don't think people are really listening to the seriousness of this. I mean, I think about people using cars. Most of us have alternatives, and most of us fail to use those alternatives most of the time. But I could go on. I'm sure you don't want to listen to me. I want to listen to you. So thanks for inviting me.
And finally we have Mike Davey.
Yeah, good evening, and like Dave says, thanks for inviting me. I'm the Labour City Councillor for Junaid's ward, Petersfield. Very proud to serve. I'm passionate about the climate because, echoing Dave, I've been part of a generation that's allowed things to go to rack and ruin, and it's time to try and address that. I've recently become the executive councillor responsible for finance and resources, and so I've got some ability to affect change through that in conjunction with my colleagues on the Labour group. And today I'm here to listen, not talk. Thank you very much, Junaid.
Excellent. So we got 15 minutes to have a bit of question and answer between youth strikers and councillors. So each of our youth striker representatives will have 2 questions to ask our councillors, and we'll see how the discussion goes from there. So, first of all, we have Arthur with his questions.
So I would like to know what you are doing to ensure that to ensure that housing in Cambridge is more eco-friendly and zero carbon, because that does contribute a surprising amount to global emissions.
I could answer in terms of one of the aspects of the county council, which of course is a Conservative county council, but as Councillor Ian Manning said, we all joined together on a motion about climate change. And one of the things that the county is doing with one of the villages is assisting them to transfer from the current form of heating that they're using to heat pumps, because heat pumps seem to be much more allied to saving the atmosphere and using less energy than other forms of ordinary boilers and so on. So that's one thing that the county is doing, and that I'm on the relevant committee, and we're supporting that on a working group to help the village adopt this new program so that all the houses, we're hoping in the end, will transfer to heat pumps. So that's something that we're doing at that level. And I know that the City Council, and both Dave Bagent and Mike Davey, I know will have a lot to say about what the City Council is doing to make sure that housing is compliant with climate change requirements. I'll hand over to Dave or Mike.
Can I say that my particular interest is traffic? I'd like to see all traffic kept out of the city centre. I'd like to start off with a blanket ban and then let some stuff back that's absolutely essential. I'm currently striving to keep Mill Road Bridge shut, because on that road are 12,000 vehicles that come into the city. It's ridiculous. And the same applies to other roads all around the city. There's cars pouring into the city like ants. They're killing our city. They're killing our people. They're creating asthma, which is a particular thing that I suffer from. So I've got a bit of a personal interest here. I think that my argument is mainly hinged on cars. I agree with the Cambridge North project. I've been instrumental in trying to challenge on the planning committee anything that we can challenge to keep heat costs and things like that down. And Cambridge North needs to be an electric, no gas, no cars township on the edge of the city.
I don't know. Do you want me to go next, Junaid?
And I was saying back to Arthur. Are you happy with the answer you've got, or?
Oh, do you want me to say, sorry, Junaid, do you want me to say something about the housing that Arthur asked about?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. There's 2 issues, Arthur, for me. The City Council, forgive the boring stuff, does housing. So we're responsible for housing. So we have 8,000 council houses. So one of the real challenges for us is about how we retrofit those council houses to make sure they're more environmentally friendly. And that's going to be difficult because it'll be hugely expensive. What we have more control about is, as Jocelyn was saying, is about new developments. And it's therefore imperative, I think, that as City Council, we make sure that those houses are as low in terms of carbon as possible. But it's important to stress that will cost money. And it's therefore weighing off that balance between how much we can spend on making sure they're carbon neutral and how many houses we have. So it's quite a difficult balance that we're going to have to find, but that's the responsibility that we have, and we need to be challenged if we're not doing it right. Thank you, Arthur.
I just really quickly come in with one final point on that around 30% of the carbon emissions in Cambridge are caused by housing altogether. Obviously not the council housing alone, but all the housing in Cambridge. And that's why I agree with Arthur's key question, because it's absolutely essential, because housing is a human right. And as it's a human right, we have to make sure that it enhances other human rights, which are to live in a world where climate change is somehow neutralised. Thanks.
Did Arthur, do you want to say anything before I hand over to Josh Matthews?
So you mentioned about the heat pumps, but then there's quite a few other things which you could be doing to ensure houses remain zero carbon. So like, are you planning on having like a on like making like solar panels cheaper, or like making like it essential for more houses to have solar panels and insulation maybe?
Yes, absolutely. There's a solar panels proposal currently that if people get in touch with the county council, you can find out about the solar panels, because there is this project currently going forward to ensure that people can have solar panels fitted to their houses, and there is some reduction, I think, in the cost of that if one wants to adopt that approach. Yeah. I agree with you. Lots of other things can be done, and I mean, I'm the Labor group, and we of course don't run the county council, but Labor does run the city, and that's why there's attention being paid to the city council housing. And Richard Johnson, who's the councillor who deals with the housing, is absolutely cognisant of the importance of ensuring that as far as possible, when new housing is built, it is built with attention being paid to the need to recognise that climate change is real. And as Mike Davies said, one of the problems with retrofitting is that it's a lot more expensive than if you build the houses right from the word go, with proper facilities for saving energy and so on. So that's why the City Council is looking very closely, because it does have a large housing program, because we must ensure that everybody can fulfil the right to having a home space, a roof over our heads, preferably a roof that has solar panels on it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I just jump in quickly at risk of taking up everyone else's time, I think if there's one thing to highlight, it's a phrase called road mapping. And that's one thing. I mean, I'm personally very keen on pushing forward sort of the idea of, like everyone said already, to retrofit all our existing houses is going to be incredibly expensive. But we need to get a handle on sort of exactly where we are now, where we want to get to, which is net zero, but also when and how we're gonna get there. We need to get a handle on exactly what the costs are going to be of retrofitting versus what the additional costs are of just building net zero carbon housing. So, for example, a passive house standard right here and now. I think that's going to be one of the key things, if we can do anything over the next couple of years, is really nail down exactly where we are, get the data, know exactly what our homes are emitting, and actually have, as I've said before, the expert. We've got the world leading road mapping experts in Cambridge University. We need to pull them in and actually get this path from here down to net zero really, really detailed and really mapped out if we're going to have any chance of making net zero, whether it's 2030, whether it's 2040, 2050.
I think we will move on. Okay, I think we'll move on to Magnus's questions then.
What are you doing to ensure it is affordable in the city to achieve net zero carbon emissions?
Anyone like to take that question on first?
I think,
sorry, go ahead, Jocelyn.
Yeah, thank you. What the city has done, everybody agreed, all the city councillors. I'm not a city councillor, I'm a county, but I was at the debate when the city council adopted the emergency motion for climate change. And what the city is doing is looking at all of its own buildings, because of course the city has the council housing, but it also has its own buildings, office buildings. We all know Mandala House, for example, where people go to pay their council tax or seek advice from the council about other matters relating often to housing. And so the Guildhall is a very old building, and one of the problems with old buildings is that they're even more expensive to retrofit. So there is a review going on by the City Council of all the buildings that the City Council owns and runs and is responsible for. So because really, as Josh Matthews said, we have to do an analysis of where we are and what the problems are with the buildings, for example, before we can take the most positive steps. Of course, we know some of the positive steps we should be taking, such as recycling and making sure that when the green bin is out, the green can be collected. When the recycling bin is out, what it has is in it is recycling. So we do have a city councillor, executive councillor, whose primary task is taking care of the rubbish and the rubbish bins, and that's because we believe that this aspect of climate change and this aspect of household waste is absolutely vital, that we get everybody working together to do something positive about recycling and about recognising that we are responsible for our own waste and we should cut down on it, and when we have it, we need to dispense with it in the most positive way. So that's just two things: a review of the council buildings themselves, and then the issue of household waste and how to deal with that effectively. Other city councillors might have something else to add.
Yeah, I think, Jocelyn, you've summed it up very, very well there, but it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier, that the critical thing is that we have as full a picture as possible of where we are now and where, well, we know where we want to get to, but exactly how do we do that, and how do we do it at every single year between now and then, even coming back to reporting at say 6 month intervals. But yeah, I think one thing that's come out very recently, you've probably all seen, the government have thrown out this big pot of funding for retrofitting. And obviously the council does not currently have the budget to retrofit all of our homes. I think persistence in that process, trying to get as much funding as possible from central government. I think we need to work really closely in partnership with all the surrounding authorities, particularly South Cambridgeshire, who are building the next local plan for, which is going to include hopefully so much detail on how we decarbonise homes. Have a really strong working partnership there, so we can pull as much funding as possible into greening up both the council's housing stock, but also making it available for residents who live in either privately rented homes or in their own homes.
I think if I can just add very briefly to answer Magnus's question, we've done things around taxis, reduce, so that in future we're only able to have electric taxis. We're obviously decreasing our own, if you like, fleet to make them carbon neutral. So whilst the city council's reduced their own emissions by, I think it's a quarter in the last 5 years, that really is only a start, and there's so much more we can do. I think the other thing we need to do, which has been expressed by Josh and others and Jocelyn, we have to work very closely with partners, because it's everybody's responsibility, and just to accept that there's knowledge base everywhere and not think that we have to be in charge. So it's about collaborative working, I think, Magnus, and about how we can take things forward together. Otherwise, as I think we've all agreed, progress will be painfully slow.
Could I just jump in? I think, Magnus, your question was about, as I understood it, was about how you make it more affordable to be carbon neutral. And of course, another aspect to that is reducing people's costs in general. And that, owning a car is actually a very expensive thing. And you're having to repair it, having to maintain it, having to drive. If you get caught up in congestion, it becomes even more expensive. So part of this is about getting more and actual safe cycle lanes, so fully segregated, which I'm pleased to see in my wards, there are two of the only properly segregated cycle lanes in the city. But it's also about getting public transport that's not just more affordable, but is also more regular, is at convenient times, is reliable, which I think we all realise that public transport is not particularly reliable. And those things are in the purvey mainly of the mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. but he's up for election next year, and our candidate Ada van der Ven is going to be the main natural challenger to him. And certainly we would actually start to use things like the franchising powers that the mayor has.
That was blatant politics, and that was blatantly political. That's just not right.
Sorry, Dave, what?
To say that your candidate is the natural challenger to him. I think that Labour Party's candidate is also.
Well, and I didn't interrupt you, Dave. So I mean, I'm just answering the question that Magnus asked. But say, Magnus, it's partly about, it is partly about all the things the other councillors have mentioned, but it's also about giving people other options so they don't have to spend large amounts of their cash on both something that's very expensive, the private car, but also something that is not green.
Before we move on, can I ask councillors when they wish to make a point or answer one of the YouthStrikers questions, can they go to the function to raise their hand? I think everyone, you should know how to do that. Yeah. They go to the participants section and bottom right raise hand. Just make sure that YouthStrikers do have a chance to reply to your answers. I'll hand it back over to Magnus now.
So the second question that I have is, what are you doing to control the urban sprawl and ensure there is room for biodiversity alongside our very busy city?
I'm going to come in first again. This is a really important question, as all the questions are really vital. One of the things that we're doing is that there is a housing development, I'm back to housing, but there is a housing development that's happening at in the Arbury area of Cambridge, that's North Cambridge, and it's where there is the Arbury recreation ground. And what's happening there is that because we're going to take a very small part of the green, to build some flats, because people, as I said earlier, must have a home. We really have, there is the Arbury recreation ground. That was interesting. And we have we have a responsibility to ensure that the green is maintained and that there's provision for biodiversity there. Biodiversity is a very large part of the City Council's promise and commitment, and there was a motion on biodiversity that accompanied the climate change motion that came after that. Other aspects are that we have a large number of trees that are being planted. There's the regular tree program where somebody has a baby, then they can have a tree. But there are a lot of trees that have been gained, and our county councillor, executive councillor Katie Thornborough, is in charge of that. So if people want trees, they need to get in touch with City Councillor Katie Thornborough. Now, on a very local level, if I could put in a plug for this, myself, together with Councillor Claire Richards, who represents Castle, and Katie Thornborough, have put in an application for Castle Mound to be turned into a town green, so that in perpetuity, every one of us would be able to have access to that, and we would maintain it as a green, including the green space in front of Shire Hall, because that green space in front of Shire Hall is not protected at all. And I know that some people might think this is a very small issue when there's so many big issues about biodiversity, but everywhere where there's green, everywhere where there's trees, everywhere where there's undergrowth, there are animals of all sorts, there are insects, we need to preserve those habitats. And this application for the town green is one application that we've made to try to ensure that that whole area will be preserved in perpetuity. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and there is a real commitment to biodiversity. Somebody else must have a contribution to make. I can't make them all.
I was looking for the raising the hand function. Sorry, I've lost it. Oh, I've got it here.
Yes, you've raised your hand.
Junaid, Chair, basically the key is the plan that's being put together. Every several years there's a master plan, if you like, that looks at both South Cambs and Cambridge, which I think Josh referred to in one of the earlier answers. And that sets out how you can both look at what the city and the surrounding area needs in terms of housing, whilst at the same time protecting the environment. And the process has begun now, and it's therefore incumbent that we try and influence that for the future, because again, it's not so much our generation that will be affected, it's you and your children. So we have to get it right now, and it's a very boring process, but it's really important, and therefore that's the way of actually starting to tackle the question that you raised in a formal way.
So I'm going to allow Magnus to make any last points he has.
I mean, what I mainly picked up from the biodiversity thing was that you are doing quite a bit to help them, and that's really good so far.
I'm going to hand over to Luana to ask her questions.
My question is, will there be more pavements around the following along bus routes? So my example is the guided busway route, as there's a pavement around it that is used by both cyclists and pedestrians, and they do provide very peaceful and scenic trails with easy access to a bunch of meadows and fields, and it's quite quiet around there. So if we had the option for more of those, that would be great.
Oh,
okay, so I'm going to allow Ian Manning to speak first.
Thanks, Luana. I mean, absolutely. I really hope there are. I mean, I agree with you. The busway is a wonderful example of a really nice, wide cycle and pedestrian path. Ironically, it's technically not even a cycle path or a pavement. It's actually, technically speaking, it's a maintenance track. So it was a kind of it was almost an aside. I think some of us have described the busway project as, for all its massive overspend, one of the best sort of cycle pedestrian paths in the county. Something in the North Cambridge plan, which I'm critical of parts of the North Cambridge plan, but this new housing development that many people have mentioned are a large number of greenways. So green areas and paths around, so rather than having sort of standard housing development like roads and all that sort of stuff, it'll actually be green areas. There are also plans for a number of what are actually called greenways coming into the city, for example, from Waterbeach and from other areas of outside the city. So there are a large amount of these kind of things in progress. Of course, the difficulty is getting these right with the detail and overcoming what can sometimes be sort of local opposition based upon very specific local circumstances. But I think it's one area where I think I've seen a lot of good collaborative work between parties in the city and councillors in the city from all parties to try and get these things in, because we recognise the importance. And like you say, it's really nice to be able to cycle down a path and get to a lovely lake. I used to run around the lake on the science park, and I think it's a really good area to highlight, and a really good question. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to allow Mike Davey to speak now.
Very, very briefly, Luana, have a look at the Chisholm, what's called the Chisholm Trail, which is opening up now, which is probably a very good example of what we could have across the city, which others in the room, in the chat, I think have probably had a whole heap more to do with. But I don't know if you know this area of the city, sorry, this area is because I live here, but the bit that goes really from Ian's ward, East Chesterton, right the way round down to the station and out through the city. And there's a big bridge just being built there, which shows the commitment, I think, of several parties. And there's another bridge going on the Newmarket Road. So there's all sorts going on, and it shows that there are examples, and it's just how we build on them, really. Thank you, Junaid.
I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's okay, unless one has any more points on that first question.
No, I don't have any more points. Those answers are really great. Thank you. I do have a second question, though. The new electric buses that run the new number 6 bus through Oakington, would there be a chance for those to be used for other bus routes? Because they are like they're quiet buses, they're really aesthetically pleasing to look at, and ultimately they'll make main transport roads like St Andrew Street and St Paul's Road and the station a lot less polluted and nice to be around.
Yeah, Jocelyn?
Thank you. That's actually the responsibility of Stagecoach, because those are their buses. But my understanding is that Stagecoach is intending to it has committed to changing to electric buses over a period.
How can eco ambassadors and the general public?
And so there is that commitment. As was said earlier, of course, buses are ultimately the responsibility of the combined authority mayor, who is currently Mayor James Palmer. So he has responsibility overall for buses, but Stagecoach is committed to that. And one of the things that the city is doing, because we know that electric the emissions from electrics, this is a problem. Sorry, this is a proposal to overcome emissions, carbon emissions. And what the city is doing is in parking areas like the Grand Arcade parking area, putting in electrical points so that people can park there and plug their car in and get their cars recharged. Now, of course, that then serves cars, and we all agree that cars are not the optimal form of transport, but cars are the optimal form of transport with people with a disability, and we can't forget them in this whole project that we've got to have action taken against climate change. So what we need to do is to ensure that those with a disability who do have to rely on a car can do it by charging their car at an electrical power point. And I know with the county, they're building buildings at Alconbury, because the proposal is that we move out of Shire Hall and go there, and they are putting electrical points in there as well. But to come back to the buses, Stagecoach, as I understand it, has made a commitment that they will gradually bring in electric buses over time. They're not promising they'll do it immediately because of the financial implication, but ultimately they will be saving if they change to electric buses.
Ian Manning.
Thanks. And just to back up what Jocelyn said, it's primarily down to the mayor, and the mayor has this power of what's called franchising, which he's spectacularly failed to actually use in the time he's been elected. So it's something that we really do need to look at. But I do think there's a role we have here, even when we don't have it as whatever council we're in, where we don't necessarily have the absolute power to change things. I think we have a power to influence what we can influence, and certainly along electric vehicles, South Cambridgeshire, which is run by the Liberal Democrats, has got is about to get the first electric bin lorry. Apparently it's one of the first nationally. So that's an area where you can prove that stuff can be done. And they also have a scheme, I think it's called Zero Carbon Grants, for businesses and residents to try and reduce carbon footprint, and that can be used for things like electrifying parts of the fleet if the business has a sort of has a transport need. So I think the more we show that as councils we can move to electric vehicles, the more other businesses like Stagecoach, as Jocelyn said, will hopefully come into line and meet the aspirations they've given. But I think we also do need to remember that electric vehicles aren't the solution to everything. Electric vehicles, you still have congestion with electric vehicles and things like that. But definitely, I hope that we do see more electrification in future.
You're muted, Junaid.
Sorry. I go to go to a request from Mark Gehringe to make a point as a councillor himself.
Yes, I think Dave was first, but I just wanted to quickly highlight that in the combined authority where I serve on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, there's a new climate committee, and that has enhanced is at arm's length from the mayor and advises the combined authority independently. And I think it will receive, and you can make submissions to that climate change committee. And that might be something the Eco Council might want to consider. Personally, I think the combined authorities transport plan is from the past century and should urgently be reformed. Keep in mind, all of these issues will come up in the electoral campaign with what the BBC called today the largest local elections in 2021. So there's lots you as eco-councillors could do from now to next May to influence the debate.
I'll let Dave speak and then move on to the next question.
Thanks, Chair. My point is about coming back to traffic. Buses do pollute, and electric buses don't pollute as much. But the real pollutant is the fact that the buses get held up in traffic. If we were to take the traffic away, then buses would just drive into the city, deposit the people from the outlying villages and leave again. Now, I know that's a bit of a wish list, but we are all responsible. Students, children, adults, old age pensioners, everybody, to try and reduce the amount of cars that come into the city. If the bus wasn't held up, then there wouldn't be the pollution. It would just drive through. And that is the main factor. A bus sitting in traffic pollutes. If it's moving, it doesn't pollute in the same way. We need to all take a responsibility here. We need to take a responsibility in more than cars, actually. How many young people keep buying new iPhones? Every time you buy an iPhone, you increase pollution in the world. How many times do we buy new things that we don't really need? Because everything you buy increases pollution. But my big thing, as I said earlier, is cars. We need to get the cars out of the city. If you get a lift to school from a parent, go by bike, get on your bike and cycle. Thank you. You're muted, Junaid.
I'll allow Luana to come back before moving on to the next question.
No, it's fine. I don't have any additional points or questions to make. Thank you.
With that, it's on to Ginny with the last two questions.
Hi, I was actually really glad to hear this was touched on earlier, but it's just a bit more of an extensive answer. But will the council in the future harness the closure of roads, such as the Mill Road Bridge, to create a more pedestrian and cycle-friendly environment?
Ian Manning.
Actually, I unraised my hand, but I was going to speak on this anyway. Yes, absolutely. And I've been banging on about doing road scheme trialling for about 6 or 7 years, and it's only now that we seem to actually, as a county council, get to the point where we're willing to do it. So this is a way of making, what can be fairly radical changes, but doing them in a way that tests them so they don't become permanent, with the idea that you can demonstrate to people that what the effects are, and how maybe sometimes their worries about what the negative effects might be aren't as great as they are. I thoroughly encourage you. There's a TED talk called "New York Streets Not So Mean Anymore," which is kind of where a lot of these trialing ideas come from. And I thoroughly recommend. It's 15 minutes, brilliant talk about how they did some of this stuff in New York. But it is also a lot about seeing these changes through on the ground. Last week, Councillor Bajan early sort of criticised me for mentioning politics, but I think we're all politicians, and what you want to hear is it's not just about sort of words, it's about actions. He, I believe, and maybe many other councillors supported the closure of Mill Road, and I did. But at a committee last week, we were talking about the closure of Coldham's Lane, and Councillor Bajan was speaking against it. So we've got to be able to sort of look at not just sort of saying, we support less traffic, but actually how we actually see those changes through on the ground, and consult with residents as much as possible, and work with them so that the perceived negative elements of these things can be tested and tried, and the benefits, which are not just for climate change, but they're things like safety, a more pleasant environment, and all those things are realised. So absolutely, I'm at the forefront of pushing for trying more of these things out and demonstrating to residents, and not only is there a climate change benefit, but there's also a benefit for their daily lives.
Hand over to Jocelyn.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been closely involved, as a number of us have, with there's a scheme for Milton Road and there's a scheme for Histon Road. And the idea behind both these projects is to ensure that as far as possible, you have good cycle lanes on each of those roads so that it's easier for cyclists and safer for cyclists to come either way. And another aspect of it was to fix up the footpaths so that pedestrians can walk safely. When I look at the footpaths at Milton Road and Histon Road, I've lived in Fiji, which is classified as a third world country, and the footpaths there are very similar to the footpaths in Cambridge, which is a real indictment. And they've got better roads because they get a lot of money from countries like Australia. But the point about these two projects is that also it was done to say we have to look to the future. There's a large development going on out at Waterbeach. There will be people coming from Waterbeach into the city. Therefore, rather than as with Camborne, where there was no infrastructure when that was built, so everybody got in their car, well, lots of people got in their car and drove in, and it's hard to get them out of the car once they've got in. So the aim is to get people into buses and not have as much traffic on the road, have good park and ride sites, have this improvement to cycle lanes and footpaths so that we encourage that form of walking and commuting. And then when they're in place, to see how they impact. And when we look at changes that are currently proposed because of COVID-19, a lot of money has been given to the County Council and the Greater Cambridge Partnership. We have to see Cambridge as a whole and look at these schemes in a holistic way so that we don't do something here that just causes greater pollution problems over there. And therefore we need to look at it in this rounded way. But I do agree too that we have to get on with it. We can't sit around thinking, will this happen, will that happen, and so forth. We've got to be proactive and constructive, but we need to see the impact on everyone and take into account the elderly, persons with a disability, and the traders. I'll end on this point. In Arbury Court, which is a local shopping centre, the butcher there, for example, is really intent on making sure that the meat that he sells is grown in a way that is fair in terms of the climate and so forth, and fair to the animals. And that's a really good approach to take, because some people are committed to eating meat and some of us are not, but some are. And therefore we need to work to ensure that in those traditional fields, there's attention paid to how those traders can go about making their businesses more friendly to the needs of climate change. And I commend the butcher at the Arbury Court for the action that he's taking and other traders in that complex.
I am conscious that we initially planned to end at 6, so I'll hand back to Ginny to make any points he has to make and ask the next question.
Thank you so much. Those are some really intriguing points. My final question is, will the council be more strict on planning permission in the future, especially as we're starting to face the start of a water problem locally?
Oh, God.
Ian Manning, then?
I was going to say this is going to be a very, very boring politician's answer. So I apologise in advance, Ginny. We are all, our hands to a degree are, as councillors and as councils, our hands are rather tied by what national government set for us in terms of the legal framework for how we can respond to planning applications. There will be, if you ever watch a planning meeting, and obviously I don't vote on planning because I'm a county councillor, but you will often see councillors of all sorts of different parties speaking, passionately against a development or a planning application, potentially because of its its negative impacts on climate change, and then being in a situation where, because of the legal advice given, they then have to vote for that same thing. And I think as councillors, we've all, looking at everyone's faces, we've all been in those situations, and they're desperately difficult because it does, from the public perspective, and from anyone's perspective, it must look awful that you speak against something and then vote for it. So the actual answer to this, really, this conundrum, is to get more leeway and more powers from national government in terms of how planning law works, so that we can turn things down on a more individual, local basis. And if we had that power, I think a lot of us would use it more often to some of these ridiculous overdevelopments that we get in Cambridge, because you can build a tiny little flat and it will sell in Cambridge because it's Cambridge. So although I know that sounds entirely like I'm passing the buck, it is nonetheless the situation we're in, and we really do need more power, rather than what the government seems to be proposing, which is actually ripping up planning powers so that it'll be even easier to build more of these things, which will be a desperate thing to happen. And time again, the government try and do this of all sorts of different flavours, and time again, councils turn around and say that's not how it works. And they don't seem to. Then some people having met people in DCLG, they do seem to have this idea that the planning system stops housing growth, and there's just precious little evidence for it. So sorry, it's a politician's answer, and sorry, it's slightly passing the buck to national government, but it is the case, and I think we'd all use those powers if we had them.
I'll allow Josh Matthews now.
I think Councillor Scott wanted to jump in as well, but I was just going to make a super brief point tying back to what I said earlier. Yes, Ian rightly said that so much of what we can legally enforce is fed down from national government. But the one most important thing that we can maybe do as a council is when we are the developers. So if we're building new estates and new council homes, we can set the example. We don't just have to do the bare minimum the government sets. We can go above and beyond, whether that's on energy standards, whether it's on water consumption, electric car charging, bike parking, tree planting, you name it. There's, coming back to using Cambridge as that example that can hopefully kind of filter out into the wider country.
I am keen to make sure we councillors do get to see the youth strike demand. So Jocelyn.
Yes, I'll try to be very brief, because this is a suggestion. You as eco warriors could look at the proposals for planning that are currently that the central government is actually thinking about introducing, and they're even more retrograde than the current planning. The proposal would be that Section 106 would be gone. Now, Section 106 is something that has enabled communities to gain money benefits from developments that have gone on, because the developments have had to pay a certain amount of money for community projects if they're putting forward a big development. If that goes, it means that monies that have come for biodiversity projects, for positive projects in terms of cycleways, for positive projects in terms of traffic calming, would not be able to be done. And the second aspect of it that's really important is that it would reduce the number of, currently under the law, there has to be a certain percentage of homes within any development that are so-called affordable, that are for persons who are not as well off, who can't manage to pay enormous sums for housing. That would go. And the third point, which is currently in place, is that office buildings can be converted into homes, and there are no restrictions for planning provisions on that development, on that change of an office building to homes. And the developers can have very small spaces in office buildings for human beings to live. And that's not good for the environment. It's not good for human beings. And it's something we should fight against. So I would suggest that you do find out what these proposals are, and you could make a submission to the government. If they have public hearings on it, you could ask to go to a public hearing and present a position before the parliamentary committee that is dealing with it, if that's the way it's dealt with. Think about doing that. Get your voice heard in that parliamentary arena, because this is really, really important, and we can't allow central government to change the planning laws to make them even more retrograde, as I've said, and others have already said they're bad enough. We don't want them any worse. Thanks. Oh, I think I've put an end to all discussion.
Jeanette, you're muted.
Jeanette, you're muted.
It's been too good.
Thank you to councillors and you strikers for all those lovely questions and answers. So our strikers have put together 7 demands regarding which we would like the councillors to pledge to, and so I will let Ginny introduce them.
Okay, so there are, I have about 7 written down, is that right? Yeah. Okay, so the first demand is that the council will never develop on the green belt. I think that's quite an important one. Do we sort of wait for feedback, or should I carry on with the list?
I think I just sent them to you privately on Zoom, Ginny.
Can I just ask a question, Junaid?
Yeah.
When you say the council, Ginny, which do you mean both councils?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
So, I think I sent them. Yeah.
Yeah, I have them. The second one is to commit to carbon neutrality well before 2030. A clear, honest commitment to becoming completely carbon neutral, and follow through, reporting transparently to the public every 6 months. Yeah.
Sorry, are you wanting us to respond? Sorry, Ginny.
After the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah, after the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the third one is to ensure local climate finance, collecting carbon taxes to be spent on climate change programs. The fourth demand is to support local renewables, so scaling up initiatives to convert all roofs in newly developed housing and current housing in Cambridge to green, solar, or heat reflective white, and to support sustainable buildings. The fifth one is to make a publicly available climate plan for the next decade, making regular updates on the plan and implementing on local levels together with the advisory council. And then the sixth one I have is to make local green transport accessible. So using inspiration from previous successful initiatives, make buses and transport systems net zero, and then reduce the cost of public transport and make it more reliable. So giving free access to underprivileged groups such as the elderly. And then the final one I have is to support local and independent businesses, giving them full advice and support, both physically and financially, to do business in a net zero way. For example, replacing plastics, offering reusable bags to small businesses, educating employees, and so on. And yeah, I think that is it for the list of demands.
So we have some time for the councillors to respond. In the meantime, if anyone watching has any points or questions to make, they can send them either in the YouTube chat or the Zoom chat. Okay. I'll start with I'll read off in the list ordered in. So Josh Matthews.
Yeah, thanks, Junaid, and thanks, Ginny. I don't want to speak for other people, but I think in principle that everyone on this call would like nothing better than to achieve every single one of those and commit to every single one of those points as soon as possible. I think there is, as well as the kind of consultation period on our new climate change strategy, which I said in the chat that I'll make sure you guys are the first to get to get a chance to feed into that once it's been approved. But I think there is lots and lots of really interesting detail that we can go into, and at risk of keeping us here until kind of 9 p.m. tonight, I think what would be a really good follow-up action is if we set up another call where we dedicate an hour, maybe even longer, to actually working through every single one of those points and talking through the detail. Because yes, the city council has power over sort of council housing, council house building, and a variety of other things that can influence that. But there are sort of within the climate change strategy, there are almost 5 different segments. There's what we directly own, there's what we have, say, regulatory and legal power over, and there's what we can use our platform and our influence to work, say, with the county council, with the GCP, with the mayor and the combined authority. So I think there's some fantastic detail that we can really drill down to and actually come up with a plan, but for each one of these points, but also feed that into the consultation for our next climate change strategy. And yeah, would love to organize something like that for, well, possibly 2, 3, 4 weeks from now, when we actually have the official outline of the city's climate change strategy that we can use alongside your declaration and work to kind of merge the two together.
Ian Manning.
Yeah, I just think that's an excellent idea from Josh, and I'd like to try and do the same for the county council. Obviously, the county council is slightly more advanced because down this path, because we have a climate change strategy, but potentially we could look at maybe getting you along to speak at the county council's committee, which is called Environment and Sustainability, I think it's called. Jocelyn will correct me. I can't temporarily forgot the name of it. But just a couple of very quick comments on things. I mean, as Josh said, I don't think any of us on this call would disagree with, if we could do all those demands and it was in our power, we would absolutely do them straight away. I think just one couple of specific points. The thing about public transport and reducing the cost of it, I think we've got to be a bit careful at that, because I don't think necessarily cost of public transport is the single most important thing in terms of take up. I think things like reliability, timeliness, buses being available at the right times in day that mean people can avoid using the car are as important. I mean, obviously we should get the cost down as much as possible, but I think the reliability of it and the time you can use it is probably more important for some people. And the other point I'd make is that although the county council has declared a climate emergency, we still regularly, on the committee that I lead on, which is highways and transport, we still regularly see schemes coming forward to build more roads, to build more junctions, with no mention of cycling and walking strategies as part of that, or equestrian strategies. I'll be told off by some of my rural councillors if I don't mention equestrians, so horse riding. So there's changes we can make now, and I absolutely think you making demands of us is completely the correct thing to do, and we should be trying to meet the demands. And as Josh said, the really important point here is the detail, and I'm really keen to see if we can work through some of that at the county as well as at South Cambs and the city.
Dave Bajan.
Thank you, Janae. I think the most important thing that people should be taking from this meeting is their own ability to influence. The school strike has definitely influenced people in Cambridge, and you should continue it and expand it as much as you possibly can. It also means a whole generation becomes more interested. But the one thing that could easily be done in this city, and it's already done in part, is a zero cost almost, is that people should use bicycles. Now, there are very few people, I know that there are some disabled people that cannot use a bike, but there are very few people in this city who cannot use a bike. But there's a lot of them get in cars and use them when they don't need to. Here's a statistic. Every day, 100,000 vehicles come into Cambridge, 100,000. And every evening they leave. Just think about how many cars and lorries and vehicles that actually is. So I think I push back at young people, I push back at everybody. Get on your bike. Make sure that other people get on their bike. Question people around you that are using cars when they don't need to. And thank you very much for this opportunity to come on here today. It's been really great. It's really good. That's why I became a councillor. As I said at the beginning, I'm in this business to help people. Thank you.
Jocelyn?
Thank you. I'll start with a negative and then I'll go to something positive. But the at the County Council, the Constitutional Ethics Committee, a group of us, myself and colleagues from the Liberal Democrats Party, I'm Labor, we actually voted for the proposition that all projects that were going before other committees, if they impacted on climate change and the environment, should actually be referred to the Environment and Sustainability Committee just for our comment on them and our review of them. Now, unfortunately, the colleagues on this committee who are from the Conservative Party voted as a bloc against that. And one wonders why we have an Environment and Sustainability Committee if we're not actually going to review what's going on over the whole of the council functions. But some positive things. I would say, if you will, forward to me, and I would say to others of us on this call, that whole list of 10, we'll do as your Professor Marie Claire has suggested and take them back to our respective political groups, and we'll talk to them and endeavour to see how we can effect a commitment from our respective parties to your pledges. But two other really quick points I'd like to make. The one about the local tax and having a percentage of that for renewables. That's a hugely important idea and really a very good one. Some of our tax goes to the police, some of our tax goes to the fire authority, and some of the tax, of course, goes to the the city council. But there'd be no reason why we couldn't actually, we'd have to get possibly an amendment through at parliamentary level, but to have a percentage of this to go to environmental causes and so on. I'll give you an Australian example. In Australia, because it's a federal system, the Commonwealth gives grants to the states. And there's a provision in the Constitution that says that the Commonwealth can give grants to the states on particular terms. And there was a time when the Commonwealth said, we will give a grant to the states for women's shelters, women's refuges. There was another time when the business taxes, businesses were told that they had to put a certain percentage into childcare, and they had to put a certain percentage into training and retraining of their workers. Now, those prospects, of course, could be transferred to climate change proposals. And then the final point I'd like to make is reconstruction, recovery and renewal. There will have to be money coming from central government to endeavour to ensure that we can come out positively of this COVID-19 disaster and crisis. And your point about local and independent businesses, I understand that my party, the Labor Party, will be seeking to ensure that local businesses are supported, and in this support we can, I will take this back to my party, say we need to make sure that when local businesses are supported, they do commit to positive approaches that will encompass climate change, and therefore the money will be used in a very positive way to support business in that sense. So thanks so much for your list of demands.
And Mike Davey.
Yeah, just really, I think Josh's suggestion earlier on about coming back and breaking the pledges down is a very good one, because then we'll be able to have a full debate, and I think importantly an honest debate, because of the 7 pledges, some are far more achievable than others, and some we actually have control over. And the ones I'd like to focus on is for your ability to hold us to account for the ones that we can do something about. I don't want to end up blaming central government when actually we can end up doing something positive ourselves. I think I also would support what Jocelyn just said about taking back the professor's suggestion that we need to go back to our groups with your 7 demands. So I know Ginny's now left the call, but if Junaid could forward us the 7 demands, that'd be great, and we can have the discussion and then come back to you. And finally, just to echo what other people have said, thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a real privilege to listen to you and your questions. Thank you, Junaid.
Thank you. I'm going to allow the youth strikers to have any final points before I put a vote to everyone for a follow-up meeting. Okay. So if we can use, I think we can use them on Zoom. We have reactions. You can have like a clap hands or a thumbs up. So all those in favour of having a follow-up meeting to discuss the details in our demands and the council's actions, please put one of the reactions on.
My reaction button's not working, but I'm trying to put the thumbs up.
So we will keep in touch with you over the next few weeks to make sure that meeting then happens. Thank you to Jocelyn, Josh, Ian, Dave, and Michael for coming and speaking with us and answering our questions. Thank you to Luana, Magnus, Arthur, and Ginny for asking these important questions and demands representing the climate justice movement. And thank you to you for watching and listening to our discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. And
thank you to Marcus for trying to set this set up, and Junaid also for trying to get this set up and making it happen.
So to all those watching on the internet, you can keep up with Cambridge Youth Strike actions on our social medias. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and you can email us. Please do keep in touch. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.